Silence is a heavy thing. In a house full of people, silence shouldn't exist. And yet, for Elena, it had become a physical weight pressing down on her chest. It wasn't the silence of peace, it was the silence of erasure. She stood in the hallway of her in-laws' home, her hand hovering over the doorknob. Inside the living room, she could hear the clinking of porcelain teacups and the low hum of television, but the moment she turned the handle and stepped inside, the atmosphere shifted. It was immediate. The air grew cold. Heads turned away. "I'm home," Elena said. Her voice was soft, conditioned by months of walking on eggshells. No one answered. Her mother-in-law, Martha, aggressively flipped a page of her magazine. Her father-in-law, George, stared intently at a spot on the carpet. And then there was Vanessa, Mark's sister, the prodigal daughter who had returned 3 weeks ago and turned the sanctuary of this home into a battlefield. Elena retreated to her room, her sanctuary shrinking day by day. She sat on the edge of the bed, her fingers tracing the cool metal of her locket. She thought back to Mark. Mark, with his sales floor charm and his warm, reassuring hands. When they met, he hadn't just offered her a date, he had offered her a lineage. For a girl who grew up in the sterile, echoing halls of an orphanage, the promise of a big, messy family was an addiction she couldn't resist. "My parents will love you," he had promised. "Your past doesn't matter. You're one of us now." And for a while, it was true. Or at least, she paid for it to be true. The trouble had started in the kitchen, 3 months prior. Mark had already moved away for his temporary transfer. A career move they decided he should take alone so Elena wouldn't lose her own promotion. It was a rainy Tuesday when George, her father-in-law, had cornered her while she was making coffee. He looked small, defeated. He confessed in a whisper that he wasn't going to work anymore. The stress, the anxiety, it was killing him. But he couldn't tell Martha. Martha, whose love was conditional on status, would leave him if the paycheck stopped. "If I take a break, she'll leave me." George had trembled, his eyes wet. "Elena, can you help, just until I'm better?" Elena remembered the tightening in her gut. It was a massive request, but she saw her own fear of abandonment reflected in his eyes. She agreed. She became the silent pillar of the house, transferring half her paycheck into George's account every month so he could pretend to go to work while actually sitting in the park or visiting a clinic. She bought their peace. She bought her place at the table. But then, Vanessa came home. Vanessa had stormed back into the house after a fight with her own husband, bringing a suitcase full of bitterness and a tongue sharp enough to cut glass. She needed a target for her unhappiness. And Elena, the orphan, the outsider, the one without real roots, was the perfect victim. It started with whispers. Elena would walk into a room and the conversation would die, replaced by smirks. Then came the gaslighting. "Did you know," Martha had asked one evening, her face a mask of betrayal, "that the neighbors say you've been gossiping about me? Calling me controlling?" Elena had been stunned. "I don't even know the neighbors' names, Mom." "Don't lie," Vanessa had interjected, leaning against the doorframe, picking at her nails. "You think because you support, well, because you're here, you can judge us? Your institutional upbringing is showing, Elena. No loyalty." The accusation stung more than the lie. Institutional upbringing. It was a weaponized phrase Vanessa loved to use. The breaking point didn't come with a scream, but with the smell of vinegar and soy sauce. Elena had come home late, exhausted from a 10-hour shift where she was carrying the financial weight of 2 households. She walked into the living room to find a celebration. A massive sushi platter, the premium kind, $60 at least, sat on the coffee table. Martha, George, and Vanessa were laughing, chopsticks in hand. They stopped when they saw her. "Oh," Vanessa said, mouth full of tuna. "The outsider is back. We didn't think you'd want any. It's a family thing." Elena looked at George, the man whose dignity she was paying for, the man who was eating sushi purchased likely with the allowance she had transferred that morning. He looked down, refusing to meet her eyes. "There's pudding in the fridge if you're desperate," Martha muttered, turning back to the TV. Elena went to her room and didn't eat. The hunger gnawing at her stomach was nothing compared to the hollow ache in her chest. She realized then that money couldn't buy blood. To them, she wasn't a daughter. She was a resource, a utility. The next day brought the rain, a torrential, angry downpour that turned the sky a bruised purple. Elena drove home with a sense of dread she couldn't shake. When she pulled into the driveway, her headlights cut through the gloom and illuminated something in the center of the muddy courtyard. A pile. She stepped out of the car, the rain soaking her blouse instantly. She walked toward the garden, her heels sinking into the wet earth. There, sitting in a puddle of mud and water, was her life. Her designer handbag, a gift to herself for her first promotion, was twisted and soaked. Her laptop bag was open, the device inside glistening with water. A pair of heels Mark had bought her for her birthday lay on their side, filled with sludge. Elena stood there, the freezing rain mixing with the hot tears suddenly springing to her eyes. The front door opened. Vanessa stood there, dry and warm under the porch light. "It was cluttering the hallway," Vanessa called out over the sound of the rain. "I hate clutter. Besides, having a stranger's things in the house feels unsanitary. I thought the rain might wash the Orphan off of them." Elena looked up at the porch. Martha was there too, peering from behind the curtain. And George. George was standing right behind Vanessa. "George?" Elena's voice cracked. "Dad, I paid for the roof you're standing under. I paid for the food in your stomach. Are you going to let her do this?" George flinched. He looked at his daughter, then at his wife, and finally at Elena. He saw the water ruining her computer, the destruction of her property. He turned around and walked back inside. That was the moment the cord snapped. The desperate little girl inside Elena who just wanted a mom and dad finally died, replaced by a woman who realized she was the only one who could save herself. "Okay," Elena whispered to the rain. "Okay." She didn't storm in. She didn't scream. She simply gathered what was salvageable, threw it into her trunk, and got back into the driver's seat. She was still soaking wet, shivering violently, but her mind was crystal clear. She drove. She drove for 4 hours, crossing state lines, the windshield wipers keeping time with her racing heart. She was terrified. She was going to Mark. But the doubt was a poison. Was he like them? Had he known? Was she driving from one trap to another? When she unlocked the door to Mark's small apartment, it was nearly midnight. He was still in his work clothes, reviewing papers. He looked up, startled, and then his face broke into a pure, radiant smile. "Elena? Honey? I didn't know." He stood up but stopped when he saw her. He saw the mud on her shoes, the red, swollen eyes, the way she was trembling. What happened? His voice dropped, losing all its lightness. Elena collapsed. She fell into him, and for the first time in her life, she didn't hold back. She told him everything: the secret leave, the money transfers, the insults, the sushi, the rain. She waited for him to make an excuse. She waited for him to say, "That's just how Mom is," or "Vanessa is going through a hard time." Instead, Mark went deadly silent. He held her tighter, his grip almost painful. "My father took your money?" he asked, his voice shaking with a suppressed rage she had never heard before. "And they put your things in the mud? I'm not going back, Mark," she sobbed. "I can't. If you want to see them, you go alone. But I am done." Mark pulled back and looked her in the eyes. "You think I'm going back there? You think I'm speaking to them after this?" He reached for his phone. "I am cutting the allowance. I am blocking the numbers. You are my family, Elena. They are just people we used to know." The fallout was swift and brutal. Elena transitioned to remote work the next day. Her company, horrified by the story of the destroyed equipment, supported her fully. Back at the in-laws' house, reality hit with the precision of a guillotine. The day after Elena left was payday. Or rather, transfer day. Elena imagined the scene. Martha walking to the ATM, expecting the balance to be topped up. The insufficient funds notice on the screen, the confusion, the panic. Her phone began to ring. First Martha, then Vanessa. "We need groceries," Vanessa's text read. "Stop being a brat and come back. The house is a mess." Then, the call from George. "Elena," he wheezed into the voicemail. "Please, Martha found out. She's screaming. We can't pay the electric bill. I thought we had a deal." Elena listened to the message in the safety of Mark's arms. She pressed the delete button. "I don't owe strangers anything," she said, echoing Vanessa's words. The collapse of the house of cards was total. Without Elena's secret funding, George's deception was revealed. Martha, realizing her husband was jobless and penniless, turned her rage on him. The stress caused George's health to truly fail, forcing him into actual, unpaid sick leave. Vanessa, no longer able to leech off the household funds, tried to crawl back to her ex-husband. That was when the final truth came out. She hadn't left because of a fight. She had been kicked out for an affair. Her husband laughed in her face and slammed the door. Elena and Mark never visited. They heard, through distant grapevine chatter, that the in-laws had downsized to a cramped apartment. Martha was working a part-time retail job she hated. Vanessa was working shifts at a diner. Months later, Elena sat on the balcony of their new home, her hand resting on her stomach. A new life was growing there, a real family. She touched the locket at her throat. She had learned the hardest lesson of all. Family isn't who you bleed with, it's who you bleed for, and who is willing to staunch the wound. She smiled, closed her eyes, and listened. The silence was no longer heavy. It was peaceful.